How can I reduce or eliminate my real estate expense as an RIA? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 74. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the RIA model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, to jump into today's topic. So a couple episodes I made a whole show or episode on how to have the highest income as an RIA. So if you haven't checked out that episode, take a look at it. As a couple shows ago. And in part of that, I did talk about real estate. But I wanted to do an entire separate episode here to dive a little deeper into it as well. And talk about, hey, as if you were to go into that RIA model, how could you reduce your real estate expense? And so there's kind of two main macro points I want to start with here at the top of this episode. And that's part of why are we even talking about real estate expense? Well, in an independent practice, and an RIA is certainly in that camp, the two biggest expenses you would have of running that practice are your real estate expense and your staff expense. Now, I'm not going to get into staff expense. I've talked about kind of different ways you might be able to outsource things in other episodes, and maybe I'll do an entire separate episode on that as well. But because those are the two biggest kind of fixed expenses, again, real estate and staff, it makes sense that, hey, if in this case on real estate, if you can reduce or kind of an extreme example, eliminate that expense, obviously that's going to improve the P&L of your practice, hence why it's an important topic to be talking about here. So that's number one. Number two is that COVID has changed everything. So I am making this episode late in 2022. Had I been making this episode 3-4 years ago, things would have been looked at differently. But the reality is COVID has fundamentally changed what the entire country looks at from a remote work perspective or the need for office space in some capacities and those sorts of things. So whatever your preconceptions were pre-COVID, just know the world has absolutely changed, and you have to look at it through a new lens. And so some of the examples I'm going to give on this episode are kind of more post-COVID or after the COVID world that we live in, reality, as opposed to what it was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago type thing. So just know everything has changed. You have to have an open mindset because of that. So to kind of at a high level to encompass kind of the biggest part of how you could reduce or eliminate your real expenses is something I often refer to. I know it sounds clickbaity, the dirty little secrets of real estate expense. And what that quote unquote secret is that you need to be paying, as an advisor, you need to be paying for your real estate expense as a fixed cost, not as a variable cost. So what I mean by that is, if you are someone that's in a W-2 environment, maybe you're at a wirehouse brokerage firm now, and so you are you receive a payout for your services. You provide the service to clients, you charge a fee, you get a payout on that. Now, as I talk about often in these episodes and different articles I write, I strongly encourage you to think of not just your payout, but the inverse of your payout. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're at one of these wirehouse firms, and I'm going to use very simple numbers in this episode. I know some of you will have higher payouts or lower payouts, or it's not always this clean, but for the sake of simple math, we'll use simple numbers. So let's say you're at one of these firms and you're getting a 40% payout. Again, we're using simple numbers. Now, I would argue, and I've ranted about before, if the payout table and the compensation plan says you're at 40%, well, the reality is you're not really at 40%, because the other 20 plus pages of the comp plan are meant to whittle that down in different ways. Not to mention, there's probably some of that is deferred comp. So you're not actually getting the 40%. So I want to acknowledge that, because I talk a lot about that. But for the sake of simplicity on this episode, we'll say somehow you're magically getting that 40%. again, which you're not, but for this example, we'll use it. So if you're in that wirehouse world and your payout is 40%, the inverse of that means you are paying your firm 60%. So mentally think of it as, okay, I am providing the services to my clients. You're the one that goes out there and finds the client. You're the one that retains the client. You are providing services. You're charging a fee for that. Think instead, I know this is not technically how it happens at wirehouse firms. This is the same for regional firms, any type of W-2 firm where it's a payout structure. But the idea is mentally think that 100% of that fee comes to you, and then you then have to pay your firm for the value and services they provide you so that you can provide those services for your client. And so that's what the inverse of the payout is. So if you're getting a 40% payout, the inverse of that, well, the reality is you're paying 60% to your firm. Now, they are providing you value. They are likely providing you an office. They're possibly providing you a sales assistant. They're providing you technology, those sorts of things. There's hard costs with that. They deserve to be paid for that. They're for-profit companies. They deserve to be able to generate a profit. But the question is, are you getting enough value for what that inverse is? So to use, again, very simple numbers, let's say you're $1 million producer and you're in that 40% payout. Well, that means you're paying 60% to the firm or $600,000. So are you getting enough value from your firm, that real estate, that sales assistant, that technology, for $600,000? And that's $1 million producer. Imagine if you're a $2 million producer, your payout would be a little higher, but that would be over $1 million that you are paying to your firm and getting certain value and services in return. Part of what you are paying for in this example, 60%, is, again, your office, the office that you sit in, maybe access to a conference room, those sorts of things. So you are paying for real estate now, even if it's not a line item, even if you're not writing a check each month, you are paying for real estate no matter where you are. And in a situation where you have a payout, you are paying for it via the inverse of that payout. So here's the problem. If you are paying for it in that variable nature, so variable meaning, well, the more revenue you generate, the more fees and commissions you generate from your clients, that 60% in dollar terms keeps going up and up and up. And yes, maybe your payout at some point, the percentage-wise will creep up a little bit. But the reality is the more you grow your practice, which hopefully over time you are growing your practice, the more you are paying to the house and the more you are essentially paying for office space. And the problem is your office doesn't grow in proportion to what you are paying for it. So if you, as an extreme example, let's say you're $1 million advisor, again, you're paying $600,000 of the house. Let's say you double to a $2 million advisor or a $4 million advisor. Your office space is not going to double or not going to quadruple. You're not going to have access to a conference room twice as big or a conference room 4 times as big, but yet you are going to pay close to 2 times as much, 4 times as much. And the reason I say close to, because again, your payout percent will vary some, but it's still going to be close to that. So that's the problem with paying for what is in reality for your firm. Real estate is a fixed expense. They either own the building or they lease it. And yes, each year it could tick up slightly because of increases in rental costs or increases in property taxes. But the reality is, for the most part, it's a fixed expense for your firm. But as you grow your practice, that's a variable. You are paying for it on a variable basis. So if you increase your practice 50% or double it or quadruple it, whatever the case is, you're effectively keep paying more for the exact same office space you're getting. And that is turning your P&L upside down from an ability to manage the one of the 2 biggest expenses of running an advisory practice. So I encourage you to ask yourself, hey, how could I turn it actually, no, not turn it, but how could I realize it as a fixed expense versus this variable expense nature as it goes up? So keep that in mind as we go through this kind of episode here. I'm going to give some examples of how to reduce the cost, but the biggest one by far is you have to find a way to say, hey, I don't want to pay for my real estate as part of my payout. I want to pay for it directly. And the easiest path to do that is if you go down an independent path, whether that's the RIA model or if it was with like an independent broker dealer, where you are responsible for, as they say, your local expenses. So you pay for real estate. And yes, you think, oh, man, real estate's expensive. But the reality is you are paying a lot, likely right now, for real estate. If you are a larger producing advisor doing $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, think about the inverse of what you are paying to your firm and the value you're getting, in a big chunk of that is supposedly for the real estate. That can be a very large number that some of you are paying for real estate that is nowhere near that cost if you were able to pay it directly yourself. So again, the main goal is try to find a way that you can pay for real estate for the fixed cost real estate truly is, not pay for it on a variable basis. So now we'll dive into kind of ways, so just some examples of ways to reduce your real estate expense, or in some cases, maybe even eliminate it. And again, I mentioned that the biggest one is find a way to pay for real estate yourself on a fixed basis, not a variable basis. That trumps everything else. If you can accomplish that, that's going to move the needle the most. But I did want to share a few other examples of creative ways folks are reducing that expense even further, even though it might be a fixed expense for them now. So the first one, this is kind of more on the extreme side, is just to go completely virtual, to not have an office at all. And you might say, well, I can't do that. And again, like I said, COVID has changed everything. I think pre-COVID, that argument is a tougher sell. And you say, I don't know if any clients would go for that. Are they really going to want to do things, by Zoom or whatever the case is? COVID has changed all of that. Zoom is a common day a thing nowadays that most all people are comfortable with. So there are advisors and teams that are going fully virtual. They do not have an office presence at all. And you might say, okay, yeah, realistically, is that just for startup RIAs? And yes, a lot of startup RIAs they're starting the profession from scratch, so they're no assets when they're starting. Yes, they do virtual. Yes, it works for them. But I'll give you an example where even larger practices. So imagine you have a very niche practice, which is a lot of people say, hey, you should niche down in your practice. And let's say you are positioning yourself as the absolute expert on whatever niche you want, optometrists, and you are the go-to person, and you put out all kinds of content, all kinds of resources, and you position yourself as the expert financial advisor for the needs and demands of optometrists. So when you're putting out that information, you are likely working to try to get clients, optometrists, no matter where they are in the country, not just necessarily optometrists in your particular town, because if you're putting out this content, all these resources demonstrating your expertise, you're trying to attract optometrists in general. So if many of those clients will likely not be in your town, just by the fact that there's much more space in the country outside of your town than in your town. And so the reality is, if you're going to be attracting clients from all over the country, most of those clients are never going to set foot in your office, even if you did have an office. They're not going to travel across the country to set foot in your office. They're going to do everything virtual, everything remote. And again, that is doable. And we're seeing that happen because if you can demonstrate expertise, trustworthiness, that you are the go-to person, again, particularly for a niche, people are working with advisors that are not in their same geographic area. And so the reality is, if most, if not all of your clients are not local, you don't have a need for a local real estate office. You can fundamentally change your P&L and dramatically reduce and eliminate that part of the expense pie if you wanted to. So number one is just a virtual approach. Again, it's not for everyone, but just know that you got to think outside the box, and that it is for many advisors and teams becoming more and more feasible. And to the degree that does work for you, that is a massive cost savings if you were able to implement that. So the next one is kind of more of a hybrid approach to that. So maybe that kind of scares you off and you say, yes, most of my client interaction on a day-to-day basis will be virtual, will be on the phone, will be Zoom. Maybe I go to see them. Maybe they're not even located in my city, so they're elsewhere. So of course it's going to be virtual. But I do still have some clients that do insist on coming in and seeing me in person, or maybe at least with the local clients, when they're prospective clients, I do feel that's part of my kind of value proposition to put forward, is to have them meet me in the office and see the office. So an example there is kind of use a hybrid approach where, yes, you can do a lot virtual, but maybe you still want office space, but maybe you don't need the same footprint of office space that you would have needed pre-COVID. Maybe you only need half the space. Maybe you can get away with a conference room and maybe just one or two offices and maybe a reception area, where before maybe it was something much larger than that. And so an example I've seen with teams is, let's say you have a team and it's 4 or 5 advisors. Well, if most of the advisors are going to be working remotely on any given day and not coming into the office, maybe you only need 2 offices for advisors, and those offices are just set up as workstations. They have a docking station, they have a monitor, they're ready to go. So whichever of those advisors needs to be in the office that day, all they have to do is bring in their laptop, set it down, and they're up and functional. And you can just coordinate it amongst yourselves of who's going to use what office on what day. And again, if you're not all showing up every day, or let alone even remotely every day, you maybe don't need a standalone office for everyone. So you can potentially reduce that footprint quite a bit. So consider a hybrid approach. Could you, knowing you might do a lot virtual, then maybe that remaining office footprint that you feel you maybe still need could be a lot smaller than the kind of pre-COVID mindset where the thought was, oh no, every advisor needs a full office. Every member of the team needs a full workstation. We need the full conference room, maybe 2 conference rooms. Think about, could you reduce that down and manage that in the new kind of quasi-virtual world that we live in? So that's the second one. And then the third one I'd just say is get creative. Think creatively about how you could do this. So I'll give you an example. There's a wirehouse team I'm working with that they're still currently at the wirehouse. They're still paying for the real estate with that variable expense. But they are just independently on their own. They are members of this high-end social club there in their town. And so they have, pretty healthy fees that they pay for that, but they get access to nice facilities, the club facilities that they can go to themselves. It has a restaurant in it, it has bar area in it, and it also has meeting space in it. And so what they often do, just because they like doing it this way, is as opposed to clients necessarily coming to their office, they say, hey, client, you want to meet at the social club? Because this is a nice social club. I'm a member there. I can get you in. We can have a good time. We can meet there. And a lot of their clients like doing that and actually prefer doing that. And so what these advisors are thinking is, wow, if we were to break away, do we, the advisors, even need our own office footprint? Because one, we could do a lot virtual. 2, a lot of our clients want us going to them now anyways, whether that's meet them at a restaurant or maybe even their house or whatever. And then we also have this large chunk that if we're going to meet kind of a neutral third party, they want to meet at the social club. So why do we even need an office footprint? Maybe we can get rid of that. When needed, we'll use the social club facilities, which, by the way, had meet-in facilities in there. So if they need more privacy or a conference room, they can rent it by the hour, utilize those resources. And so it's occurred to them, wow, we could do a really interesting hybrid approach. And by the way, we're already members of this social club anyways. It's not going to be an added expense to the cost of us. And if anything, it will turn it from a personal expense in their life into a business expense. So an even better savings there. But that's a way to think creatively. Another example is, you see, I'm down here in Florida. You see a lot of Northeastern financial advisors that a lot of their clients are migrating south as they get older and coming to Florida. And so many of those advisors are realizing, wow, half my clients are now in Florida, and maybe even more than half. And I have half still up in somewhere in New England. And so they're realizing, well, if I'm going to have office space, and maybe I do feel I need some amount of office space, again, maybe that hybrid solution, well, it's a lot cheaper down in Florida than it is maybe in New York. So if I'm going to have that footprint, why don't I have the office space down there? I'll do things virtual where needed, and I can always travel back to, again, perhaps New York and have those meetings in person, which right now they're doing anyways, because their clients are already split one place or the other. They are just recognizing, okay, if I'm going to have that office footprint, why don't I put it in the lesser expensive locale and utilize that as a way to reduce my cost as well? So again, the main point there is think creatively. Again, with COVID, things have changed. How you can implement virtual, how you can implement kind of one of these hybrid approaches. The world has changed. What would work best for you, and obviously work for your clients? But whatever you thought the answer to that was 5 years ago, 10 years ago now has fundamentally changed. So rethink how you could do that. So the thing I would wrap up with, I thought this was best position. I was talking to someone about this topic once, and talking about the amount that for instance, wirehouse advisors are paying in this variable expense, and how a big chunk of that is for office space. And for many of you advisors that are larger, if you're $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million producer, you don't get a breakdown of what that inverse of the payout is going to. They don't say, oh, this part of that is going to real estate, whatever the case is. But effectively, again, that is what is happening. And many of you, the person I was explaining to this, they came back and said, wow, some of these advisors that they are paying so much back to the house back in that inverse of the payout, and a big chunk of that is in theory going to real estate. That if the advisor were to just capture that themselves, again, in that independent nature, and have to pay for the real estate themselves, for what they are paying for real estate now, they don't get a line item, they don't get an itemized bill that shows it, but effectively what they are paying for real estate now, not only could they get very nice real estate that they could lease, they could be buying a property and potentially acquire the property relatively quickly if they, instead of paying their current firm this huge amount for effectively for real estate, they attribute it to actually acquiring a property. And that's a whole wealth building event on its own. So if you were going to be paying this large amount for real estate, you might as well be acquiring property as part of that, acquiring your own office space. And so I thought that was a great way that this gentleman framed it up, that to make you think, wow, it's not just paying a lot, maybe I could save some. It's not only that, if you were willing to pay that much, we'll redirect that and actually acquire property for yourself. Don't be essentially acquiring it for your firm. Again, massive, not only just P&L advantage, but wealth building event as well. So with that, I hope this has helped you think through some of the variables of running your own P&L. That's one of the benefits of having your own RIA or being in an RIA model where you're responsible for your local expenses. You have the ability to manage these things, these quote unquote local expenses, and you can get creative, and there's ways to reduce or eliminate those costs. And so that is one of the big benefits of going into the RIA models, the flexibility and the control you would have with that. So hopefully this has got you thinking about how you might do it if you were to transition into the RIA model as well. And this is the type of thing I have conversations with advisors all the time. So if you'd like to chat about this topic, certainly happy to have that conversation with you as well. As I said at the top of the show, if you're not already there, if you head over to transitiontoria.com, again, you can find all the resources, the videos, the podcasts, the articles, the white papers. For those of you watching this on video, as I mentioned, it is in podcast form on any major podcasting platform. Just search for the Transition to RIA podcast. You will find it. And if you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related, on the website, there's a contact link at the top of every page. Just click on that. You can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me. Happy to chat with you again about today's topic or anything else RIA related. Head over to transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value on today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.